Okay, now we are recording. And I am sharing my screen. Okay, the purpose of this video today is to demonstrate the data series chart in Mingle. So to start, I am in a wiki page that I'm calling Reporting Sandbox. You could use any wiki page or any card. I'm going to start by clicking on this button in the toolbar. You can see if you hover over it, it says Insert Data Series Chart. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And I'm just going to cover the most common data series chart that we see most of our users creating. So I'm going to start by saying I'm going to look at type of story. And I'm creating just a simple data series chart. So I get to decide first if I want it to be cumulative or not. If I was doing something like a burn up chart, I would want it to be cumulative. If I was doing something where I want to see each individual card's property for the given sprint, for example, we're going to use the sprints for this chart, then I would want to click false. So I'm going to first click false, and then we'll change it later so that I can demonstrate both ways. Next, we've got the X label start, end, and step. These are optional. The way you can tell if something is an optional field or a required field is whether or not it has this red star next to it. A red star indicates that it is required. So you have a choice of putting the X label start and end and step. You do not have to. So I'm actually going to go down here and set the property that I'm going to use in the X labels because I feel like it makes more sense that way. In this case, I'm using the sprint property, the tree property sprint. I can show you very quickly. This is my tree. This is the property that I'm using, just called sprint. So I'm using my sprint property. For the start, for example, if I was going to put the start and the end, I could do like sprint 1 through sprint 10. But for the purpose of this, I'm just going to keep it simple. And I'm actually just going to click the X's to get rid of those two fields, and the X label step as well, because the X label step is just which of the sprints do I want to show on the X axis. For example, if I have through sprint 1 through sprint 10 and I want it to show every other sprint, I could do an X label step of 2 and it would show every other one. That does not impact the data. So if sprint 2 is not showing on the x-axis, the data for sprint 2 will still be in the chart, if that makes sense. And then I can use this blue plus sign to add other fields. So for example, these are the three that we just went over. There's also the X labels conditions. If I wanted my sprint to be limited to a particular release, for example, I could put that in there. I could also put that in the chart conditions, which I feel like is more commonly used. You could add something like type equals story and release equals a card in particular. Like you would use the pound sign number and then the name, just like you would in Mequal. There are lots of different properties here, most of which are not commonly used, like X labels tree, that would just be a tree property. Two that I do like are the data point symbol and the data labels. So let's go ahead and load those, the data labels as well. I find that this is helpful in just making the information a little bit clearer. And if you change your mind, you can just click the gray X to get rid of something. As for the rest of these, a lot of these, for example, the chart and the plot height and the trends, this is just the size of the chart, the legend, where it is. Chart type is another one that's interesting. The data series chart is usually a line graph, but you could do, for example, a filled in line graph or a bar chart as well. So in this case, I'll just keep it a line graph because that is the most common. I'd say bar chart is probably the second most common of these types. Besides that, a lot of people don't really use the rest of these. I do have more information on them. I will send this out with this video. This is just from our documentation. It's a macro reference page. This is the data series chart, which, for example, just some of the different options that you can fill in. And if we scroll down, here they all are. Here are all the different like X levels properties, X levels start. So if you have any questions about what you can do with these different optional properties, and again, they are all optional, you don't have to use them. That is a great reference point. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll down. Now I'm at my series level. Previously, we were at the chart level where it says chart level options. So these conditions are affecting the entire chart. All of these conditions are. When we get down to the series level, we're only looking at one particular line on this chart, one particular series. So let's say I want to organize by sprint. My aggregate could be something like a count of all of the cards all of my story cards within a sprint. I could also do something like some story points. And that would add up the total amount of my story points within a given sprint. I'm just going to keep it simple and use the count. And then as far as condition goes, now we've already got the type equals story up above in the chart conditions. So for the status level, or sorry, for the series level, I'm going to do something like status is equal to production. And if I just very quickly go to, this is my status card property. This is my production value. So that's where I'm getting this information from. And then I would want to name this something like completed stories. And then let's say I want to have a chart where, this is a very common example. Let's say I want to have a chart where I have all of my stories and all of my completed stories. So I want to see which ones have been created and which ones have been finished, and then compare the two. So this is my, where status equals production, my completed stories. Oh, and below I have a trend line. I don't have to have that trend. I can get rid of it. It is optional. But I do find the trend line to, many people find the trend line to be helpful. And then I'm just going to copy this. And you're always given two series level options. So let's go down to the next series level. This is just the 2 lines on the chart. That's all that means. So I'm going to paste it in and I'm going to get rid of the condition. In this case, I'm just looking at all the story cards within a sprint, and I'm just going to call it all stories. There we go. And that will also have a trend line. There are additional options. So if we go down to this blue plus sign, it's the same as the information that was above. If, for example, I wanted to have a different data point symbol, I could go with the diamond on this one. Which would be different from the chart level. If I was doing a burn down chart, I would want to include the down from option and have something like select some story points, because that would be where I want the burn down chart to be getting its information from. But I'm not doing a burn down chart, so I will just X that out. Let's see what else. You can also do trend ignore if you want your trend to just if you want to get rid of the trend, or if you just want it to ignore the data. And then type again. If I wanted to, I could mix, for example, this between bar chart and line chart. But for this sake, I'll just keep it simple and just do like a line chart for the entire chart. So I have my 2 data series. If I wanted to add a third data series, this would be just a third line on the chart. I would click this blue plus sign. That's a little bit confusing because we're using the same symbol in multiple places that do different things. So just keep in mind, if the blue plus sign is next to series level options and I click it, I get a third series level, which I can just get rid of with this gray X. If I click next to one of these conditions, I just get more conditions. So that is just something to be aware of. Keep in mind, you can hover over it and it will give you a little clue as to what that button does. So now we've got our basic chart, we've got our conditions, we've got a few options here that we've added that are completely optional. We have what is being measured on the x-axis here. We have what is being measured by the chart here. And then we have an optional condition for this series. And again, we don't have a condition for this second series, which is why it's just covering everything. So we've got this all set up. Let's scroll to the bottom and hit preview. There we go. So there's a preview of our finished chart. At this point, I could hit insert, but maybe I've decided that I actually want to do the burn up chart. So I'm going to go back up to the top, change this from cumulative false to true, and then let's hit preview again and see what happens. Now you can see the data is being added. So instead of being a spike at 2 and then down to 1, this is going from 2 to 3. So you can see each time the data is being added more and more. So that's a good burn up chart option. And let's go ahead and insert that. If I want to edit this chart, for example, if I've decided it's not big enough, it's cutting off the very bottom of my x-axis of my labels, I can click on this orange button. If I just hover over it, the orange box appears, and I can click on that. And then this is a YAML file that will appear, and I can edit this. So for this, you want to have this macro reference page that I mentioned earlier from the documentation, because some things you want everything to be exact, and because some things are a little tricky, like for example, sometimes I forget if X labels is plural or not. If I put X label start, nothing will render for that particular condition. So I want to make sure that I get it exact. So I always just keep this open. So let's say I'm looking for chart conditions. So that's a little bit higher. So we have chart width and chart height. We also have plot height and plot width. So I'm going to go back to my chart, and just anywhere in this part in the chart level conditions, the series are below the word series. So these are the individual series. This is the chart conditions. So just anywhere here, I'm going to indent 4 spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, have chart dash height, and then I will set that to, let's go ahead and do 700 pixels. And then I will do 1, 2, 3, 4, chart width, and we'll do another 700 because that fits nicely on the Mingle page. If we want to make the actual graph bigger, we can do plot height, and we'll do something like 550 because we want to make sure there's enough room for the x-axis, and we can do plot width, and we'll just do 500 because we want to leave room for the legend. So now I'll click OK. There's no preview when you're editing the YAML file. It's just you edit it and then you click it. And as you can see, this fits the x-axis a little bit better. You can read all of my sprint names, and the legend is also more visible. So this is a good option. If I want to edit it again, I can just hover over it, click the orange button, and I could change something like, let's say I changed my mind about cumulative. I don't want the burn up chart. I want it to be showing me individual data. So I'm going to change cumulative to false, click OK. This changes my chart. And again, you can see, oh, in this sprint, I completed 2 stories, but in this other sprint, I completed 1. And you can see according to the legend, what the graph or what the trend lines mean, and what the different colors mean. So these are just a few options for the data series charts. Again, you can use them for both burn up and burn down charts. And in the next series, I'm going to be going over the daily history chart, and I will also cover the difference between the daily history chart and the data series chart. So I will do that in the next video.